Alright, so the last two videos were kind of tough because I had a lot to talk about and not a lot of video to go along with it. So we'll try and avoid that in the future. Till then, you can see I've got quite a bit of railroad here. It's actually starting to look like a railroad. And although I didn't shoot my specific scenery work here, the methods are actually very similar to what I did with the Atlas Metals project, which on the prototype was just over there. So, and it uses some of the same materials. So we'll talk about that, and I'll focus on specific things that I think warrant attention here, and also how I dummied up a structure over there in place of the real one that's got to be built later. And also, I got a new locomotive in the roster, which is my first sound-equipped locomotive, and its address is number 3. So I said I would talk about certain specific scenic details on here. Now, overall, what you can see is just basic ground cover. This is more or less the start of scenery. If you remember when I built a small series of dioramas just to test out methods and stuff like that, what I put on there was just the very beginning stages. And ultimately it serves as a foundation upon which greater detail can be built. So really I'm not looking to get much more than basic dirt, ballast, and maybe a little bit of undergrowth. Like the way I use the Woodland Scenics earth blend to kind of look like underlying dead plants and the weeds that in areas like this obviously don't get raked up and attended to. Things grow, and if they're in the way, they get set on fire, but mostly they just get ignored. So if things don't necessarily seem complete in the sense that they probably should be for really great scenery, it's because we're only in the beginning stages of it. As I get other details in place, like for example, there needs to be a signal head that goes right here, or in other cases, I've got these two little rail bollards right here. Those things will get in place first, and then we'll start to think about the finishing touches. And a lot of it is done by eyeball too. If I go a particular direction with something, like I've got some ballast over there that's a different color that left to its own devices would probably look pretty weird. But I can go over that later, maybe plant some static grass or stick something in there. Or if things don't work because of the glue mixture I use, I can wet it, kind of scrape it up, and try again. We've seen me do that before in other videos too. So all in all, we're just trying to get things to look not like the underlying support work. So, and the other thing too is when you're paving roads like this, where there's probably a good somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch of thickness on these roads from the surface of the road down to the table. Well, that's a curb like this high in HO scale. So you obviously want to fill that in. So that's the other thing that's kind of going in there is as the heavier material like sifted sand or coarser dirt goes in there to kind of fill up to that edge, so that when you do put the finer materials on there, you're not making it that thick, or that thick. We'll try and keep to the appropriate scale here. Now let's talk about some of the other more specific elements here. This right here is the exit ramp coming off of Larimer Street headed for I-25. And this has been modified since because when they put Auraria Parkway in right here over Walnut Street, they changed this exit and kind of tore things up, and obviously they tore a bunch of things up here. So this is a nice little three-dimensional piece of scenery that helps break up some of the flatness around here without actually having to build a proper structure. I just laminated some foam, layered it up, added the same road method that I used with the DAP concrete patch, and then built concrete retaining walls and structures as I needed using 1/4-inch plywood that's been puttied and painted up. And then the ground cover and the scenery all goes the way it goes. The ballast color on the main lines is Arizona Rock and Mineral. They make a color called, I believe it's Santa Fe Cactusberry Red. And so I use that as the basis for my mainline ballast. And then that all starts to transition out to the lower grade stuff that you typically find in yards and secondary tracks. Something else that's worth noting here, all the pictures I've seen of Rice Yard have different colors of ballast in different areas at different times. So I've been kind of experimenting a little bit and test bedding different kinds of ballast mixtures, and I think I'll probably end up getting away with it, because if you went to the prototype, it was kind of catch as catch can, it seems. And it's like, oh, well, the tracks are getting a little washed out in this spot. Well, I guess we've got some limestone handy, throw it down in there. So things end up looking a little haphazard and dirty, and that's kind of what I want. That's why I like to model a yard during this time period when things weren't quite so neat and clean and just so. Now let's talk about my crossings here. I built these railroad crossings using the same Ken Patterson method of gluing in a bunch of railroad ties and then sanding it down to the top until it hits the top of the rails, cutting in my flangeways, and then I stained it with a mix of black acrylic paint and water. Just made a nice gray wash to put over the top of that. I still need to touch up some of the tan areas, but otherwise those are coming along nicely. Paved the roads using the DAP concrete patch method as before. These two little rail bollards right here, I don't know what they were doing there, but knowing what I do about truck drivers and knowing what I do about Denver, the odds that some truck driver was trying to come through here, he made a right, like especially after a snowstorm this happens. The truck tries to make a right when hitting a turn and crossing the tracks at the same time. He doesn't think about his trailer, the wheel's off track, and then the trailer wheels get hung up on the train tracks. And I actually saw this happen as a train was coming. It's a miracle that train even stopped in time. So I figured they probably put a couple of pieces of 70-pound rail in the dirt right in that spot to keep trailer wheels from inadvertently tracking into their tracks, getting hung up and creating a dangerous situation. Because, you know, people ain't perfect. So just one of those little details that I felt like I could add right away. And it's kind of good to get that in there before I finish whatever ground cover is going to go in there, because then it will fall and settle around the edges of those little details. One more thing, I've talked about how I like to do switch stands, especially with these Caboose Industries N-scale ground throws that I'm using. And it's the same method as I've outlined I think a couple of times now, where you cut your head block ties to fit right up to the edge of the ground throw and then come a little bit past it. So you're actually making 4 individual tie pieces and then gluing them into place in such a way that it makes it look like the switch stand itself is a much smaller object sitting on top of the head blocks, when in reality it's under the dirt with the rest of the head blocks. So it helps reduce the bulk of these N-scale ground throws, and still allows us to have functional throws. So anyway, before I get too far away from this, let me also talk about this kind of dummy that I built of the Larimer Street overpass. Basically, I just cut some masonite pieces roughly in the shape of the structural bits that made up this overpass, to the best of my ability to find that out from the severe lack of photography that seemed to happen around this structure. I have to base it a lot on good guesswork on other existing structures in the area that did happen to land in somebody's camera lens all those years ago, because all these structures are long gone. So I'm just kind of going with my best guess and a bit of masonite. And really, I don't plan for this to be the final structure. It's kind of rough looking. I don't know if this is the sort of thing I would want to display in public, although here I am talking about it on a YouTube video. But really, I just wanted something to kind of stand in and help cover the hole and give me an impression for where the structure is going to sit and how it's going to look and all that happiness. And the other thing it needs to do is kind of give me a feel for how it's going to connect and relate to something like this exit ramp here. These two things do have to kind of line up and coordinate, and I needed to check the clearances for equipment coming through here. I found I actually had this bridge a little too low before, and I tried bringing a high cube boxcar through there and it immediately started scraping, and I thought, well, they at least had high cube boxcars while this yard was in service, so the bridge was probably at least high enough to clear those. So nobody's ever told me about this before, but I'm pretty sure with the advent of stack trains, that probably created a need to take some of these older bridges and structures down, just to deal with the clearance issues associated with that. Alrighty, almost forgot to talk about this SD9 that I just got. So I just picked up this SD9 from Walthers. It's lettered for CB and Q, It's as close as I'm going to get to Colorado and Southern right now with this one. I'll have to renumber it to number 825, since that was one of only two of this older pre-1959 body style that actually made it into Chinese red paint. Everything else was painted in the Blackbird scheme, and everything that came the 1959 body style, as I talked about before, had some noticeable differences to the front end and the back end. Those are the ones that were actually delivered, I believe, in Chinese red. So it's got an ESU Loc Sound Select in it, factory installed. The out-of-the-box settings are pretty good. All the number boards and the Mars light and the red warning light that are all part of the Q package are all on separate function buttons. The headlights have a nice neat little thing where they come on gradually instead of just popping on. And the speed settings are, they're done right, I guess is the short way, the TLDR version. George Bogatuk told me a term called slot car mode, where most engines are set up such that as soon as you turn on the throttle, the engine starts moving before the sound of the engine has even spooled up. This doesn't do that. This one, when you open the throttle up, the engine starts spooling up and then it starts moving, much like its prototype. I don't know why more sound decoders don't come right out of the factory like that. And when you turn the throttle all the way down, I mean, without the drive lock effects on there, it will come to a stop pretty quickly as the engine is winding down. But and it automatically applies brake sound. It's really set up quite well. And it runs well, and it'll probably handle the switching duties around here, as right now it's the only sound-equipped locomotive in the fleet. And with the road trains primarily just leaving their assigned yard track and heading out to staging and that being it for the rest of the operating session, the switch engine is always working, always back and forth. It's really the star of the show. I mean, this is a railroad yard, right? So in that regard, in order to make maximum use of the sound on this turkey, it'll be doing the switching around here for a while, at least until I get my SW1200s. So, the downside, I mentioned that this sucker was stuck on address number 3. And the reason it's stuck on address number 3 is because using my Digitrax system, I am unable to program this thing to a new road address the way I would ordinarily do on my regular function decoders. And I don't know why. And making the problem worse is I'm not finding the documentation I need from either ESU or Walthers explaining to me how I'm supposed to change the decoder address, which as far as I'm concerned is one of the most basic functions anybody does to any decoder. Is what's the first thing you do? Get it off of address 03 and put the unit number in there, or maybe you've got some super secret system how you're going to do it. You do you, but I can't do anything but leave this sucker on 03, because if I try to change the address, it stops responding, and I don't know why. And I don't want to go into some rabbit trail about the possible reasons why, because the truth is I just don't have any idea. And without any explanation from either the manufacturer of the engine, who chose to install this turkey in their model, or the manufacturer of the decoder, who's more than happy to tell you about the benefits of the system, but not what to do when your Digitrax system won't light up a stupid address in it. So yeah, I'm kind of frustrated by that. I shouldn't have these kind of problems on something that's clocking in between the $200 and $300 price range. If you can't make things work simply and intuitively, you had better stick some documentation in there. There better be real clear instructions. And such instructions did not come with this model. And I don't know if I'm going to have to jump through 97 kinds of hoops just to get the CVs on this thing to cooperate. But if that ends up being the case, nice though this ESU unit is, and it's been set up very nicely and everything like that, I'll probably just go ahead and take it all out and stick a Soundtrax unit in there and call it a day. Because it's just like with my Digitrax system. The reason I went with that is because if I had a question, I found an answer, and it didn't take me that long. It wasn't that hard. This, on the other hand, has been anything but that. So maybe if somebody wants to leave something in the comments and explain the error of my ways, I'm all ears, as you can clearly see. Until then, I guess I have to keep digging. And until then, this thing's address is going to be 03. So it's really the only gripe I have about it, but it's a pretty big one. And something that we just shouldn't, I feel like we shouldn't have to see this kind of thing anywhere in the hobby. I mean, this is strictly optional, folks. This is not essential to my existence. I have to eat. I have to do certain other things. I don't have to spend $200-300 for stuff like this. Okay, so anyway, I guess that's as much ranting as it deserves. In every other respect, it is just what the doctor ordered. And only thing I could ask for that is maybe do some in Colorado and Southern paint proper. All right, I'm getting to be ranty and silly, and I think that's enough for that. Let's close out the update. And I've got a train coming down the main line, which will no doubt derail in the middle of the shop, because that's the way things work on this railroad. I had a lot to talk about, but I didn't really shoot much related to the stuff that I had to talk about. So that's one little problem. But as you can see, my train has come uncoupled and it's ruined the shop. There it is. There's the miracle of 34th Street. I was a little bit close. What's hanging up?